As you watch this video, keep in mind how these concepts apply to the lab that you did with M&Ms. And by the end of the video, you should be able to answer two questions. How is natural selection related to a species' fitness? And how is evolution defined in genetic terms? So if you think about the people around you, no two individuals look identical, and that's because everyone has different genes. Everyone got different DNA from each of their parents. And these genes are sections of DNA which code for proteins. And proteins could have a couple of different effects on you. They could actually form what you look like. For example, genes code for proteins that give you the hair color and eye color that you have, as well as your skin color, or they could code for biochemical processes that tell your body how to react to certain things. So for example, proteins tell your body how fast to grow and what parts of your body should grow in what proportions. And so genes have two or more forms which are called alleles. The gene pool is made up of all of the alleles in a population, so all of the alleles amongst all of the individuals that mate together. And so if we look at this population of mice and we want to calculate the percentage of the two alleles in their gene pool for fur color, we would count up how many brown alleles are in the population and how many black alleles are in the population and divide by the total amount of alleles. So the easiest way to do that is assume that we're looking at a population of 100 mice. So 48% of 100 mice is 48 mice. And each mouse has two alleles, one from their mom and one from their dad. And so first we're going to count up how many black alleles there are in this population. We know that there's a total of 200 alleles because we've got 100 mice and each mouse has two. So in the heterozygous black mice, they each have one black, so that's 48 black alleles. And homozygous mice each have two black alleles. So 16 homozygous mice times two alleles gives you 32 black alleles. So 32 black alleles from homozygous mice plus 48 black alleles from heterozygous mice gives us 80 black alleles. Out of a total of 200, that's 40% of the alleles in this population for fur color are black. We can do the same thing with the brown allele. We've got brown mice that have two alleles each, and so 36 times 2 is 72, plus 48 alleles from our heterozygous mice gives us 120 brown alleles in the population. And so we have 120 out of 200 total gives us 60% the population, or 60% of the gene pool are alleles for brown fur. We know from our unit in ecology that there are very few situations where resources are unlimited. There might be a situation where a population colonizes a new place, like invasive species, where resources are unlimited, and so their population can grow very, very fast. However, in most cases, resources are limited to individuals. There's limited food, limited mating opportunities, there's limited spaces to live, and other necessities of life depending on the different organism. And so because there's genetic variation in the population and not enough resources to go around, the organisms that survive are going to be the organisms with genetic variations that provide them some sort of advantage in a particular environment. So if you look at these ducks over on the side, it seems to be an advantage to have dark feathers. And you can tell because of two different things. The ducks with light feathers, they don't survive, or they don't reproduce. But the ducks with dark feathers, they both survive and they reproduce. And so we know that having dark feathers is an advantage in whatever situation, in whatever habitat these ducks happen to live in. So that ability to survive and reproduce in a particular environment is called an animal's fitness. And the fitness of an organism depends on the environment that they live in. So, as an example, during the Industrial Revolution, or I should say before the Industrial Revolution, In England, there were these ash trees that had very nice white bark. And there was a species of moth where there was genetic variety amongst these moths. Some were light colored and others were dark colored. But as you can imagine, the dark colored moths were very easy to see on the ash trees. And so the dark colored moths got eaten by birds while the light colored moths were able to survive. Whoops. So in this particular environment, the white moths had a greater fitness because they were able to survive and they were also able to reproduce. But now comes the Industrial Revolution, humans produce a ton of pollution, and the ash trees that were once nice and white are now dark. Well, the dark moths, they now have an advantage of fitness because they blend in, and so they're able to survive in their environment and also reproduce. So you can see that the environment has a big effect on the fitness of an organism. In fact, it determines the fitness of an organism, the particular environment that they live in. And the adaptations that they have increase the amount of. So not only does an organism's fitness depend on the environment they're living in, it also depends on the adaptations that they have. So adaptations are inherited characteristics that increase the organism's chance for survival and reproduction. So in this case, before the Industrial Revolution, it was an adaptation to have light-colored wings. After the Industrial Revolution, or during the Industrial Revolution, it was an adaptation to have dark-colored wings. Because in each of these situations, the characteristic was inherited. It increased the amount of, or the chance that the organism was able to survive because it blended in, and it also increased their reproduction. So some other examples of adaptations. There's three other examples of adaptations. The first one is mimicry. So these are two different species of snakes, and one of them is poisonous and the other one is not. So this one is poisonous. It has these brightly colored bands on it to signal to predators that predators should not eat it because it's poisonous. The second snake is harmless, but it tries to look like the one that's poisonous to try to fool predators into thinking that it's dangerous so that it doesn't get eaten. And so this is an adaptation that helps this particular snake live even though it's not poisonous. Another example of an adaptation is camouflage. So the moths in the last slide were an example of camouflage, but also the scorpion fish has coloring that is very similar to its surroundings, and it allows it to blend in. So camouflage is another example of an adaptation. And the last one is actually a behavior. So if behaviors are inherited, they can be adaptations as well. And so this behavior is one that is inherited, and it causes, or it's a defensive behavior that allows this bird to scare off fox. And so it spreads its wings out and makes itself look really big so that the fox gets scared and doesn't try to eat it. So natural selection involves three different ideas. First of all, that there's variation in nature, that not everybody looks the same, and that genes determine what variations individuals have. Also that there's limited resources, that food and mates and space are all limited things, and so organisms have to compete both with individuals of their own species as well as with individuals of other species for those resources. And so because of this competition, organisms reproduce at different rates. Organisms that have good adaptations will reproduce quicker and increase the amount of those genes in the population, and organisms that don't have adaptations that are an advantage in their environment, the genes that they have are going to decrease in frequency. So this change in allele frequency is called evolution. So evolution can also be described as the change in a population over time. So you can tell by looking at this graph, dark blue is the frequency of the dominant allele, and red is the frequency of the recessive allele. And so the dominant allele seems to be increasing while the recessive allele seems to be decreasing. So this population we would say is evolving because the allele frequency in each generation is changing. So this is another example of natural selection. So see if you can go through and describe what's going on in the picture and how it's an example of natural selection. And if you unpause this, the next slide will take away these blue boxes so you can see the description. Let me move the box down so that can happen. Okay, so when you're ready, unpause this and then you'll be able to see the captions that are on the picture.